Welcome to Business Owner Tales from the Trenches, the podcast for business owners who want to see around corners and thrive financially. Your host is Carr, CEO and business owner at CornerCap. Tune in every other week for lessons learned from the trenches of entrepreneurship, business successes, and financial independence. Here's Cannon.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Cannon Carr and Claudia Bettinger here. Claudia, we have a blockbuster show guest with us today. Our guest brings rich, experienced insights on both the life cycle of companies, but also the journey of the entrepreneur. And it's a fascinating, rich discussion. Claudia, why don't you introduce our guest?
Today we have Dave Sutton on the podcast, and Dave is at the forefront of marketing services and strategies, both as a serial entrepreneur and author. For the past 18 years, he has been managing partner of Blue Rhino Capital, which provides strategic investments for middle market companies, along with other endeavors. He's also founded, grown, and sold 3 companies in marketing services. And he serves on many boards and advisory groups for business owners, including YPO. Very experienced. It's a great episode.
It really is. And in fact, there's so much information here. We cover so much ground. We're actually going to break it into 2 episodes. So we're going to do part 1 today, which focuses on mindset and planning your exit and independence, because we spend a lot of time talking about that. So that's what our focus will be on today. And as you listen to the show, keep 3 things in mind. 1, we do talk about the mindset of an entrepreneur and what kind of the subtle differences are between being a serial entrepreneur and maybe a lifestyle business owner. There are a lot of commonalities, but there are some key differences. And we always say it's important to know yourself and what your journey is there. Secondly, we spend a lot of time talking about what exit means. When is it the right time to think about exit and why? And heads up, it's sooner than most entrepreneurs think, but not too soon. And then third, we talk a lot about financial independence and personal liquidity and how and when along the journey do you need to be thinking about those things. So it's a great episode. Sit back and enjoy our conversation with Dave Sutton. Well, Dave, thanks for joining us on the program. We are excited to have you. And to start, I thought we would just kind of go back to the beginning. I mean, in a way, you've bought and sold many companies, public and private. And even before that, you were working for some large consulting firms. Did you always view yourself as an entrepreneur?
No, not really. I mean, I think when I first got started, I was very fortunate to land in the management consulting business, which gave me a lot of time and opportunity to explore and try to find what I really wanted to do with my career. I think most people, when they're really honest with themselves, are probably accidental entrepreneurs at heart. I mean, I don't think you wake up when you're 10 years old and say, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. I think it's probably more a characteristic of people who are somewhat uncomfortable with the status quo. They like change. They like to see things get better. They have ideas. They have vision. But I wouldn't characterize myself as, having wanted to go become an entrepreneur. It was more, I was on a journey, didn't really know what I wanted to do, and was very fortunate to kind of get enough opportunities in front of my, in my experience that allowed me to pick a path.
Well, so the consulting world did give you that exposure. What kind of grabbed you? What were some of the early influences, or what really grabbed your attention where you said, oh, here's that opportunity I've been looking for?
Yeah, the thing that I love about consulting and hate about it as well is it's like every project is a new experience. And my old boss used to say to me, you're going to have one good project followed by 2 bad projects. It's like, you have, and that was pretty much the same thing that happened to me. I think I started off really understanding what I didn't like more so than what I did like. So, working on logistics and supply chain projects, or, deep dives on finance and doing financial reengineering, I knew those were not areas where I was going to be happy or have a lot of ability to essentially, get value for myself as well as for my clients. I think I stumbled really into marketing and sales as it were, just luckily. It was something that it resonated with me very early on. I enjoyed the projects that I was exposed to, and I also felt like I had a pretty good, I was very good at kind of understanding the customer and kind of understanding the needs and wants of customers. And I could really turn that into value for my client very quickly, just because I kind of think like a consumer, I think like a customer, and I found it very easy for myself to make that transition.
Yeah, the consulting world does do such a great job of solving problems for clients and putting you in the client mindset, right? To figure out what does the market want, and that kind of background. It sounded like it accelerated your career into what you were doing as well. Well,
Yeah.
all right. So that was the very beginning. In a way, let's fast forward now to the end and provide some perspective. I mean, you have bought and sold at least three different companies from, when what I can tell, and we can get into a little details there if you'd like. But, more broadly, there are two types of entrepreneurs. One who just kind of works in the business and then ultimately learns to work on it. And it's kind of a single passion that rides their career. Others, it's a serial entrepreneur and one that is always working on the business. I think you're the latter, but is there a mindset difference between those two?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I think and by the way, it may be that you start out in one and migrate into the other, right? I don't think it's completely black and white the way that you described it, but I would say that when you've gone through the process of building a company, learning kind of where you add value in that company, and then ultimately exiting that company, you become aware of the fact that there's a big difference between working in the business versus working on the business. I think really serial entrepreneurs sooner rather than later figure out that if you don't work on the business, if you're not actually looking at it almost like an outside investor trying to figure out how to best build this business, you can quickly become I used to joke with people, it almost starts to feel like a hobby business, right? If you're in the business all day long, you're really good at your craft. You can be doing that for 20 years and look back and go, I really didn't build anything sustainable. I really just built something that I enjoy, a passion. By the way, there is nothing wrong with that, right? A lot of people have passion projects. They're very good at something and they can build a great lifestyle, a great existence out of that. But if you want to be a serial entrepreneur, I think you really need to just, take yourself out of the business, almost look at it like an uninterested third party sometimes, and try to get a deeper understanding of what actually is going to make that business grow. And when you're in the throes of it every day, it's really hard to be objective in answering those questions.
Well, is there ultimately a skill set you migrate to then to successfully be that serial entrepreneur and work on the business?
The biggest one is opening yourself up to outside expertise. I mean, I think, another trap that entrepreneurs, and I certainly fall into this bucket is, sometimes we think we're superhuman and we can do it all, right? We can be the CFO, we can be the CMO, we can be the CEO, we can be the controller. I mean, it's a slippery slope to, really not only trying to be good at all things, but also all consuming of whatever capacity you have to bring to the business. So step one for me was just opening up and realizing, well, I need to surround myself with people that maybe know things that I don't know or can teach me, about certain aspects of the business that I may be really good at, customer service, but I'm terrible when it comes to understanding the balance sheet, right? So I think opening yourself up to, bringing in outside expertise is part of it. And then the other one is just kind of a willingness to learn, beyond what you really are good at. I think we all naturally gravitate towards the skills and capabilities where we feel most comfortable. But sometimes you have to push yourself outside the box and actually, tackle some things that maybe aren't in your sweet spot, and where you really do have to go back to the basics and learn, ideally, from an expert.
Well, right. And get out of the comfort zone, right? I mean, whether you're just following one career as an entrepreneur or serial, I think constantly pushing yourself out of your comfort zone to be able to innovate and see around corners is just so important. As you looked at your journey, how were you able to get yourself out of the comfort zone? Is that something just naturally that comes to you out of curiosity, or you have to?
I think you make mistakes. I think that really really good entrepreneurs always have. We're generally tenacious, right? We don't want to lose. We want to win at everything. But then we're also pretty quick learners. So for me in my career, most of the time, the necessity to get outside counsel has either been triggered by a mistake, that I needed to fix, or by a fear, right? I just, I don't want to go down that path without some, my Sherpa or a guide or someone to really help me down that path. And if you're, I think what's, as you get older, at least for me personally, it shifted. In the beginning, it was like I was fearless, right? It's like everything, I'm going to figure this out. I'll bang my way through it. As you get more mature and maybe a little bit more wise, you realize that, sometimes it's a good idea to have a Sherpa before you just decide to go hike Everest, right?
Right.
So I think it's it's a mix of both of those things, but I do believe that at the core, it's your comfortableness with risk
Mhm.
and wisdom as it relates to how you're going to best manage through that risk that sort of leads you either to, you keep making the same dumb mistakes and you finally wake up one day and say, I'm going to stop that. Or you basically get, a better comfort level with accepting outside support and help.
Mhm.
In some cases, it's, acknowledging and being self-aware enough that you're not the expert in that
Yeah.
particular.
Yeah, no, it's such great points. Well, as you look across the three businesses you started, and we can again mention by name and go into details if you'd like, but just conceptually across them all, did you start when you started each one? Did you know ultimately what the end goal was in each one, aside from transaction, right? Did you have a vision for where things were headed? In other words, did you start with the end in mind, or did it kind of have to evolve?
In each case, it was a little bit different. I mean, I think the first time around, if we're brutally honest, it's you don't know what you don't know, right? I mean, there's a certain, the first time you start a business, it's usually being driven by, at least in my case, you're being opportunistic, right? You see something, you see a gap that needs to be filled in the market, or you see an opportunity to, take some assets and really crank it up and create something new from it. I think the best entrepreneurs don't think exit right out of the box, because I think when you're so focused on exit, it sometimes forces you or maybe leads you down a path where you miss things, right? If all
Mhm.
you're worried about is, I'm going to build this business and I'm going to flip it, I think it doesn't make you be disciplined enough as it relates to what you need to do to have a sustainable business. So
Mhm.
when I coach people on this subject, I usually say, look, exits take care of themselves to some extent. What I mean by that is, if you build a great business, there will be a buyer for that business, or maybe it becomes a family business or a multi-generational business. But if you build a crappy business, if you build no foundation, there is no exit ever, right? So
Right.
from the beginning, I think you have to focus on build something to last, right? As Jim Collins would say.
Sure.
By the same token, the second part of your question, at some point in time, you do become aware that this is not going to be my long-term thing, right? That I either, and I think I told you this when we met before, sometimes it's an inward-looking thing, which is like, I'm the wrong person to lead this business
Mm-hmm.
to the next level. Sometimes it's that, again, self-awareness, or sometimes it's, I don't have the right pieces in place to get to the next level, which means I'm going to have to invite some partners in, bring in some capital, whatever, to kind of take it to the next level. And then sometimes, like in my last business I told you about, it sometimes it's like, I'm done, right? I've taken this to where I want to, and I'm ready to kind of pass it on to the next generation, or pass it on to a private equity firm, or someone else to take it to the next level. So it's a very personal kind of decision that I think you go through, but it's probably driven more by the evolution of the business, as opposed to day one, exactly, this, I'm going to build this business and I'm going to flip it. There are people who can do that, but I would say there are a few, very few and far between that have that level of sophistication and vision to
Well, it's
pull
such a
that.
great point. I mean, you mentioned, you start the business and you don't know what you don't know, right? So you do have to go on that journey to ultimately figure that out, which is going to refine the gap and the problem you're solving and how you get there. And such a great point too. I mean, if you're just moving to transaction, maybe you haven't really built the sustainable business with discipline. So, I loved what you were saying. The buyer is the validator that you succeeded. Now, whether or not that buyer actually materializes when you want, we can talk about that later, but I mean, just conceptually, right? Build the business that a buyer would buy is a
Sure.
great validator. Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong. I mean, my third business, Top Right, when I started that business, I wasn't thinking exit, but I was thinking, I saw a hole, right, in the
Hmm.
market, and specifically some white space between traditional, I'll call it, strategic consulting and the agency world. And the hole that I saw was actually presented itself because I was frustrated as a public company CEO and owner of a company. I was frustrated that I had to hire both McKinsey and Ogilvy, and I
Hmm.
always felt like I was the general contractor, trying to kind of make sense out of those two different service lines. And so my idea that for that new business was basically born out of this: why can't I have both? Why can't I have the business acumen of a McKinsey consultant and the creative execution of Ogilvy in one place, with
Yeah.
one as I used to say, back to pat when we're successful. That was the opportunistic view. But at the same time, I knew that down the road, if I was successful in building that, offer to the market, there'd be a lot of people that would be interested in that, right? There'd be people that would be, whether it was the consulting world, the agency world, private equity world. I had created something, or would have created something that would have some intrinsic value to somebody else.
Yeah.
It's, I think you and I talked about it's the Jerry Maguire strategy. It's right. You complete me, right? So
That's right.
if you're building a business out there that that you're the missing piece of their puzzle, that's a great strategy. But I wouldn't go into it, I wouldn't build a business just to be, a cog in someone else's wheel, right? Because the value of a cog in the grand machine may be not worth as much as you think it might be at exit.
Yeah. Well, everything you've just described just shows a deliberate process underneath it, even, as you're defining ultimately where you're going to end up. I know you coach a lot of entrepreneurs today and spend a lot of time advising business owners, both professionally, but also just as a mentor. Do you find most entrepreneurs spend enough time defining what exit looks like, or is it accidental for many of them?
I think, unfortunately, it's accidental for most.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think everybody, that I work with. I mean, the one thing I love about working with entrepreneurs is there's amazing creativity, great passion, like I said, tenacity, risk aversion, or risk willingness to take risks.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I love hanging out with people like that. They have a lot of energy and they're contagious, right? I think probably most of them don't spend enough time on that kind of bigger picture conversation that we're having today, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they love what they do. They're very passionate about getting the business from point A to point B, but they probably don't spend enough time sort of thinking outside that lane that they're in about what is it we really want to do with this business long term. And sometimes it doesn't make sense. I mean, like we just mentioned, early on in the process of growing a business, it's probably a distraction, to think too much about exit. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of the business, sometimes it becomes a necessity, right? I mean, I remember, the first time we went through the recession in 2008 and 2009, sometimes you can get boxed in to making bad decisions that end up looking like exits, right? Like you bring in a new capital partner, or you sell off a chunk of your business to make payroll, or, there are things where you get forced and you react to the situation in the market. Those are the worst times. That's when you don't want to be on your back foot trying to make decisions about valuation and how you're going to pay off a debt or whatever. I mean, you don't want to find yourself in that place. So the sooner that you can start thinking about, maybe it's not even exit, but it's more sustainability and business continuity. Mm-hmm. The sooner you can get into that way of thinking, the better, so that you can weather the storm. But the one thing that entrepreneurs generally have going for them that a lot of other traditional, say, leaders don't necessarily have is they have a lot of chutzpah, right? They don't mind getting knocked around. They pick themselves back up, dust themselves off, and keep going. And I think great entrepreneurs are resilient and they're not afraid of failure. And that's a great thing. So if you can take the additional time to actually really think about business continuity, exit, working on the business, as we said, as opposed to in the business, if you do that and you're also a great kind of tenacious entrepreneur, it's just a great combo. It's hard to imagine that you would fail, quite frankly.
Well, and it's such an interesting point too. We talked about accidental exits, or something that looks like an exit where, and I guess that's the downside to where, again, you're not going to define exit literally exactly right, but you've got to know where you're heading, because otherwise when events happen, you're going to be forced to do something that's probably not optimal. Yeah. Which means you haven't built options or you get off path from where you should have been going. You and I talked a little bit about how an entrepreneur's business value is often most of their personal wealth, and that's not a diversified portfolio at the end of the day. And there's so often they'll wait for that successful exit event to create that value, which may never happen, right? Because there's always, as you said, there's always divots, right? Or there's always disruptions. So how do you guide entrepreneurs to create their own financial independence from the business? I know this is a little bit what you and I've talked about. How do you pull liquidity from the business and yet fund it and grow it at the same time? How do you help people think through that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, there are some, I know we're talking in generalities here today, but there are some businesses that will never have an exit. I mean, I
Yeah.
think about my, friends of mine that are lawyers. Even if you're an amazing, lawyer, it's really hard to scale and sell a law
Yeah.
firm. The more that it's tied to the expertise of an individual, the more difficult it is to have some kind of a transition away from that business. So generally speaking, what I tell people is, look, if you're in a business that has great consistent cash flow, right? But a lot of it is tied to your personal billable time. You're the one who's critical to generating that revenue, whether you're doing the work or you're sourcing the work or you're managing teams that do the work and source the work. It's really smart, I think, you can look at your business as it's almost like you bought an annuity, right?
Yeah.
Like it's going to generate cash. It's a machine, well-oiled machine. It'll generate some cash in perpetuity for me. And if you've got that situation, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you don't need to have an exit, right? You literally have built a machine that's going to spin off X amount of cash every month, every year, every quarter, whatever. And in doing so, you've kind of built yourself a nice annuity on the back end. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that. I mean, there are very few businesses that you can actually look at and go, oh, this is set up like an annuity, and the founder can just, in perpetuity, take money off the table. But that is one path. The other path, and I looked at this very closely, is you can do employee stock ownership plans. You can do ESOP, which essentially allows you to borrow money to take for yourself off the table, right? To pay yourself, and the employees essentially effectively become the owners of the business. It's very complicated. It's not something that you should embark on without a lot of outside counsel, because
Right. Good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of good advice there. But it is another path where you can effectively exit without exiting. You're not selling the business to a third party per se, but you are selling it to an administrator of a plan. And that plan has risks like any other plan, right? So you have to kind of go into it eyes wide open. The third path that I also looked at myself was you don't have to do an outright sale. I mean, you could bring on a minority partner. There are a lot of firms out there that are looking for, strategic investments where they think that you're gonna help them beat the S&P 500, right? So I can get a 30% return if I take a piece of this mid-market company, as opposed to going direct into a public company market and investing there. And there are a lot of people out there that will help you take money off the table, right? Like, you want to sell a third of the business, I'll sell you, you'll get a third of the equity. We'll agree on a valuation. Welcome to you're a partner with me now. That has some issues associated with it if that's going to be a passive or an active partner. Most people want to be active, even if they're not control, but they don't want 51%. Even if they only take, like, say, 20 or 30% of your company, they're going to want a board seat. They're going to want to be involved in decision making. They're probably going to want to put some handcuffs on you.
Handcuffs. Yep.
That you're not, just going to take the money and run. But that's a viable path. And then there are pure exit strategies where it's, maybe a strategic buyer, one of your competitors, wants to buy you out, or a private equity firm that's looking to, expand into your market and may view you as either a puzzle piece for a bigger puzzle that they're building, or they may see you as a platform to go make other acquisitions. But all of those, I think each one of those paths, it comes back to purpose, right? It's like, what do you want? If you're looking to exit and just walk away from the business, there are a few paths that are there. I mean, private equity, strategic sales are certainly one option. But by the same token, a lot of people are at an age where they want to, when I sold my second company, I wasn't really done. I didn't want to retire. And so you can find yourself in a place where you're sold, you're out of a job, you've got a lot of money in the bank, but you're not really ready to retire. So you have to be just thoughtful, I guess, about where this is leading you personally, and what your purpose is, from making any transaction.
Well, and I'd love to come back to that on a future podcast, just that personal transition and moving to that next thing with purpose and those kind of things. Well, last question just for today. I mean, in hindsight, with your career, you've made it look easy, right? Like, I know you've said, there are times when you made a mistake or whatever, but it certainly looked easy. But was there any key advice anybody ever gave you as you think back that, just really resonated through the years? Or is there something that you wish you'd learned sooner that would have, made something easier?
Well, I alluded to one of the points earlier about, and I think when you and I first talked about this, I wish I had understood debt markets. I wish I'd understood how to manage my balance sheet a little more proactively earlier. And I kind of figured it out over time, but it would have been nice to kind of have that. I think it would have helped us grow faster. I think it would have helped us navigate some things a little bit easier if I'd understood that a little bit more and maybe not been as afraid of it. That would have been helpful. And the other thing was, some of the best advice I ever got was get outside counsel, and it doesn't mean you have to go set up a board. I'm a member of a Young Presidents Organization, and I use my forum as really my outside counsel. People who know absolutely nothing about my business, but they know a lot about businesses, right? They may not know my industry, they may not know my specific business, but they understand and have seen things that I had not seen. And so having some kind of an advisory board, or even if it's just, building a network of people that have expertise that's not like yours, I think is a great thing. And the sooner that you do that, the better. And with YPO and with Forum, for me, it is a big commitment of time, because it goes both ways, right? Like you never go into those things saying, I'm just a taker. You also have to position yourself as a giver in those relationships. So the best advisory boards that I work on today, it's not like I'm the only one teaching. I'm also learning. When I'm in service of a board of directors or an advisory board, I look at it as both a learning and a giving and a teaching type of relationship. And I think the more that you can have those types of experiences early in your career, early on as an entrepreneur, check your ego at the door. You probably do know a lot about your business, certainly more than anybody else does, but there's also a world of other things that you don't know, which you don't know. And so setting yourself up to have that kind of, just interaction.
Yeah. Well, that brings us full circle back to your opening point, about not knowing what you don't know and having that open mind, that curiosity to learn from somebody who sees things differently than you. And I think that's been a key, to a lot of your success. If people do want to learn more about your work and what you're doing, what's a good place for them to go to?
BlueRhinoCapital.com, which is my private equity firm. LinkedIn, check out my profile on LinkedIn. It's all out there.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Dave, thanks for the time today. This has just been awesome playbook for helping people manage all stages of growth.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dave. All right, welcome back. Cannon, Carr, and Claudia with you here in the studio. Claudia, like we said, this is a blockbuster conversation. So much great ground to cover. And before we get into those three things we thought we'd highlight, what was your impression of this conversation?
He is just such an expert. You can tell how much experience he has from this conversation. Such wise advice, such saged advice, and really things that every entrepreneur really needs to hear. Yes,
he's had a long career and worked with so many different entrepreneurs and businesses that he's seen a lot, done a lot. So great to be able to collect his thoughts with us today. So first, I thought we'd just focus on mindset. We always say how important it is for a business owner to know themselves very well, right? And, whether you're an entrepreneur or scaling a business or just managing a lifestyle business, it's not so important to know what you call yourself, but really know the mindset in each one, because it helps you make decisions. Maybe share just some quick thoughts on what you think about mindset from today.
Yeah, absolutely. He talks about how it's a gray area, but there's a difference in being a serial entrepreneur versus a lifestyle business owner. And, you have to view the business differently depending on which one you kind of categorize yourself as. And, if you're a lifestyle business owner, are you building a sustainable business? What are you really looking to do? And if you're a serial entrepreneur, you're really pushing the boundaries. You're really trying to go beyond your skill set, and you're working on the business rather than working in the business.
That's right. Working in it, it might be a hobby. It might be a skilled passion of yours, but is it really sustainable beyond you? Whereas working on it, you really are starting to go beyond your skill set. You realize you want it to be bigger than yourself, and you have to be able to open up to outside expertise and navigate through mistakes and all kinds of parts of the journey. That said, both mindsets require a lot of resiliency and a lot of tenacity. So just an interesting distinction there. Next, we thought we'd focus a little bit on exit, because we spend so much time talking about it. When is the right time and why? And it's clear. We often say start with the end in mind. Many people say that, but you can start too early. And Dave does make a good point here about that.
Absolutely. I mean, he talks about not having your exit defined so early that you are only focused at the transaction at the end. And you really have to be focused to build the right foundation to sustain the kind of growth in order to get the transaction that you want at the end. So it's really important to have your mindset at the beginning focused on the business.
That's right. Well, focus on building what is that sustainable business. Don't worry about the transaction yet. You might miss something. And he says, you build a good business and the sale will take care of itself. But inevitably, you do get to a point where it becomes a necessity to think about how are you going to get to the next phase? And, we talk candidly about how entrepreneurs often don't think about that soon enough. And it is so key. You may come to a point in the journey where you realize the business is outgrowing your skill set. You might be the wrong person to take it to the next level leadership. You might say, I'm the right person, but we're missing some skills, some key skill sets or pieces, for us to be able to scale the business. Or you might get to a point where you're just ready, your own personal journey, ready to hand it off to the next generation or a PE firm or something like that. But he did make an important point about avoiding what?
Yeah, you avoiding being boxed into only one option. He really speaks to the importance of that. Just like you don't want to think about it too early, there is a point where it's too late, and you don't want to only have one option on the table when you're looking to exit your business.
Exactly. Or just it's a downstream. You might be in a downturn in the market and it forces your hand. He says, you make a decision that it looks like an exit. You might take on third-party capital or do an M&A transaction, but you're forced to react there. And it's not optimal. And we spend a lot of time talking with business owners about how to make sure what you're doing, you have options along the way and it is optimized in terms of your exit or succession plan and not reactionary. And then the third thing, just fascinating to spend time with Dave on, was that concept of financial independence and personal liquidity. How do you build liquidity along the way, but in particularly at the end, and ultimately become financially independent from the business? And he did talk about the 4 options quickly for how to exit a business.
Yeah, absolutely. Those 4 options too are just so crucial. The first one, some businesses never really have an exit. You build your annuity based on your skill set and your billable time. 2, you can do an ESOP, which is definitely complicated. You need outside advisors for that. 3, you find a minority partner that, you still maintain some control of the business. And then 4, you have your pure exit.
Yeah. Well, and so, playbook there, but some of the things that Dave and I've talked about in the past and or shed a little bit in this episode and a little bit on the next one is that importance of diversification of your wealth. It's like you don't want to be invested in your liquid portfolio all in one stock. And as a business owner, of course, in the early years, a lot of your wealth might be tied up in the business, but it's important along the way to ultimately build some diversified wealth. Because for reasons Dave highlights, in one of our conversations, he said there are always divots along the way. And in fact, as he will highlight in the next episode, there, in his own journey, there were 3 major disruptive events. And so you need options. Liquidity gives you options, and you don't want to be stuck, as we were talking about earlier. So diversification of your own financial wealth is so important away from the business ultimately. And I'll make one quick point too. In the next episode, we do spend some time talking about personal guarantees. And, he says an interesting point. He thinks reducing the risk of the business and creating stability is some of the most important things you do even before paying yourself.
Right.
So paying yourself creates liquidity, but creating stability, reduces risk and ultimately leads to better options too. So just an interesting nuance there. Well, Claudia, great episode. Thanks for helping me summarize it. And we will encourage everyone to listen to part 2 in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Are you looking for more resources to help your business? Visit cornercappodcast.com for our free ebooks to help you plan for inevitable transitions in your business. Tune back in every other week for a new episode.